Welcome to the Responsible Supply Chain Show, where we explore the world of responsible sourcing and resilient supply chains. I'm your host, Justin Dillon, and in each episode, we dive into real stories from some of the world's best business, government, and thought leaders protecting people, planet, and profits. Let's get it. Okay, so in today's episode, we speak with Phyllis Constanza, a leading expert in social investment, directing capital to companies who perform on financial and social returns. Phyllis is no joke. She was the global head of social impact for UBS Bank for 11 years, master's degree in public policy from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government, member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Phyllis knows what she's talking about, and today we're going to be speaking about how investors are looking at the performance of supply chains in this new era of trade disruption. Speaking of, as of this taping, the S&P 500 index fell 2.7% today, due in no small part to the tariff and geopolitical risks that are swarming around our heads and inside of our ears. So as much as I would love to pile on and add my opinions on top of this, the reality is it's all in the interview. So let's get into it. Phyllis, good to hear you and see you. Where am I finding you today?
I'm in Colorado.
Really? What part?
In Aspen, beautiful, sunny.
There.
Actually, it's snowing.
Boy, that's perfect. A friend took me to Aspen last year, and it's magic. It's absolutely magic there.
Yes, it is.
You've had a celebrated career in finance at institutions like UBS, where you were the global head of social impact for like a decade, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I was there for 11 years.
And we want to get into that. We also want to hear about what you're doing now. Maybe we can start with what you're doing at Advanced Portfolio Management. Maybe tell us what that is and what it is you're trying to build there through the social investment solutions.
Well, I'm honored to be here, so thanks for having me. And you have inspired a lot of the work that we're doing at Advanced Portfolio Management. So APM is it's a fund and asset management firm that's been around for about 23 years, and they specialize in building customized portfolios and solutions for institutions. And about 6 months ago, I was talking to the founder, Robert Kiernan, about his experience working in ESG. And we ended up talking about how social factors are really misunderstood. And there is an opportunity there to develop products that look at critical social factors. And when we think about what are social factors in ESG, those are really things that affect humans, stakeholders, like your customers, like your employees, like people working in the supply chains, and these have a really big impact on companies' financial performance, their stock performance. And so what we're doing is building a customized social factor index, looking at what are the critical metrics around social factors that drive corporate performance.
So, okay, that's super interesting, especially in a time right now where terms like ESG and DEI are all become political footballs. Maybe give us a little bit more about the sales pitch around a fund like this or a solution like this is for institutions to your customers.
It's a funny time to be starting a business called Social Investment Solutions.
Yeah.
However, if we look at who has traditionally invested in ESG products or impact investing solutions, they are primarily foundations, endowments, multifamily offices, and we're really not seeing right now a decline in their interest, although they are hesitant to use the phrases ESG. So what you might be seeing is a lot of renaming of funds that might be ESG funds, but they're calling them something else.
Yeah, are we seeing that in general? Like, is it a pullback from vernacular, not necessarily a pullback from the work that's being done around here? Because we're seeing these terms like being thrown around, but at the same time, I think a lot of companies are like, yeah, this is just what we're doing. And it's so locked into, you can call it whatever you want. We're doing social investment. We're cleaning up our supply chains. We're making life better for people and planet. Call it what you want. Are you seeing out in the marketplace, just a change of phrase and that the work continues?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. I mean, we already know that environmental, social, and governance factors play a really big role in a company's financial and stock performance. And we've proven that thesis time and
Mm,
time again. Now, it doesn't mean that all ESG funds outperform the market because they're looking at these risks, but we know that they are material to the financial performance. And there's all sorts of academic research that proves this. There's a lot of funds that have proven this. And in fact,
mm,
we've had an ESG fund operational for about 3 years now, and it outperforms the market. And when you take out the ESG screen, it underperforms. You're seeing people pull away from using the name because in places like Europe and the UK, if you're going to call your fund sustainable or impact, you've got to fulfill a number of criteria, whether it's in the UK or in Europe. Funds are starting to pull back from calling themselves this. Our fund, ESG Plus Fund, could be called a Quant Plus Fund because it's a quant fund,
why
and
not call
it
it
does the
that?
same thing.
I mean, what I mean, if the whole point of it is better performance, have we just emotionalized and politicized these terms for a while? I mean, it used to be corporate social responsibility, then it became social impact, then it became ESG. I mean, I've seen that just in my time I've been paying attention to it. They're just words.
Yeah,
If no one's going to do something if it's not going to work, I like quant.
exactly.
Call it quant.
And yeah, it's and what we're also seeing is that superficial, like a, take your hat off to something kind of
Yeah.
approach to CSR ESG from a company doesn't work. I mean, it's
Mm,
not going to affect their performance. So if they're out there just talking about, how nice this is, it doesn't work. They have to actually do something meaningful to mitigate risks associated with E, S, or G factors. And so, you're seeing a lot less rhetoric
yeah.
because
Virtue
and
signaling.
what's yeah, and what's really interesting about these issues, particularly the social, is that they're incredibly dynamic.
Hmm.
So, 3 years ago, talking about racial injustice, and inequality overall was a must. Every CEO came out and
Oh
started
yeah. Oh
talking
yeah.
about it.
Yep.
If you didn't, you were boycotted. And then
Yep.
fast forward, you see what happened with Bud Light. They used a very well known transgender
Yep.
influencer
Yep.
to launch, to advertise Bud Light, and it backfired.
They took a
And
risk.
so,
Yep.
things that would
Yep.
have driven financial performance 3 years ago are now very out of favor and will actually harm you. And so the critical thing is to understand the dynamic nature of these factors so that your fund can adjust accordingly.
Now, okay, I have so many questions. I, it feels like we're in an age of authenticity, and I almost want to throw up in my mouth as I say that, because it feels like we're in an age where the virtue signaling and the veneer of doing good for marketing purposes has just burnt up. It just doesn't. It just burned on reentry. It doesn't work anymore. So, are we moving more towards a time of authenticity, loaded air quotes around that, that says, hey, these things that we're talking about, whether it's in a commercial or in a sustainability statement, they actually do matter and they need to show up and they need to just be part of business and they need to get boring. And that's when I always tell people, you're making a difference when it's boring, not when it's exciting. When it's exciting, everyone's talking about it. When it's boring, it's just what you do. And we laud the brands that are so, these things are so locked into them, like Patagonia and others, but it's just standard operating procedure for them. And they're so, brands like that are not using the virtue signal to try to get a little bit more market share. They're just like, this is just what we do. Is it possible from where you're sitting that the markets are going to react more favorably to the brands that didn't do the virtue signaling and are just, I say brands, companies that are made it more about, this is about the core of the business and less as a marketing tactic?
Absolutely. I think you hit the nail on the head. And I love that you threw up a little bit in your mouth when you said the word authentic. I actually went to a yoga class recently, and the woman said, the instructor said, "I hope you brought your authentic self to class." And I just want to raise my hand
Wow.
and say, "What do
The hell,
you mean?
the
I
hell's
don't
that?
understand what you mean by that." I didn't, but in supply chain management, it is so important, and
Yeah.
investors are starting to take notice, and they're asking really tough questions. And so, from an investor perspective, they want to make sure that it's not just a bunch of BS.
Yeah.
And you're seeing things like pre due diligence going up substantially.
Pre-due diligence on
And
supply chains before investment?
yeah, 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 a lot of due diligence now. So, in light, for example, in light of the trade and tariff events,
Yeah.
especially those that have been recently triggered by the Trump administration, investors are looking for a lot more granular and sophisticated analysis of a company's supply chain.
Wow.
And so, they want to, and that includes things just, not only looking at whether or not they're overly dependent on particular regions or countries, but
Mhm.
also looking at how are they conducting their due diligence? What tools do they have? To conduct? And are they really rigorous tools, or are they
Mm.
simply looking to see if they got a particular check,
Yeah, check the box.
for,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Well, yeah, supply chains are certainly dominating our our headlines right now. From your perspective, how rattled is the investor community about, I mean, we just entered World War trade this week. The first shot across was shot this week with tariffs, and every day it's on again, off again. How rattled are investors community, and what is likely going to be what's likely going to be a long tariff war? Are investors doubling down into supply chains now and like really focused and pushing in their portcos to make sure that they are doing their due diligence? And by the way, and on top of that, what does good due diligence for a company look like when it comes to supply chains?
Yeah. Well, for sure, the financial world is rattled by the tariffs. They're on, they're off, they're on again, now they're off again. And you could see what's happening in the market volatility this week, last week. What we will see, and what I'm seeing from investors also, is that technology is going to be really a game changer for supply chains. And investors want to see that companies that rely on supply chains. So they're looking at supply chains, from manufacturing companies and technology companies that really rely on these supply chains that have been known for human that have been the subject of human rights abuses, let's
Sure.
just say. So
Yeah.
the kinds of things that they're looking for are you using artificial intelligence for predictive analytics, IoT devices for real time monitoring of goods in transit? And so that's what people want to see. And using technology to map their whole supply chain, including sub suppliers,
Hmm.
those companies are much better positioned to identify the risks and also secure investments. And companies that don't have this are at a disadvantage, especially in this new world where geopolitical risks and tariffs and even climate events are becoming a lot more
Sure.
frequently. So
Sure.
it's technology is not just a good to have now, it's essential.
So how does investment community, like, when it came to supply chain due diligence, the tools that most companies have been using for the last, I don't know, 20 years has been questionnaires and site audits, which are arguably lagging indicators.
Yes.
If a fund is doing due diligence on a company that demonstrates that that is the tip of the arrow of their technology, how is the investment funds looking at those companies? Is that a risk?
Yeah, so what companies are now, the best ones are segmenting suppliers based on risk levels,
Hmm.
focusing more resources on those high risk suppliers in regions that are really prone to human rights violations and environmental degradation. And this is what you do so well,
Hmm.
an increased focus on traceability and
Hmm.
transparency. So, do you have those systems in place before you engage with a particular supplier? And best practices include mapping the supply chains right down to the raw material
Hmm.
level, conducting supplier audits, which I know is controversial because when you go to a supplier, you don't They're not going to show you if
Mhm.
there's human rights violations.
Sure.
So you really have to do that in a way. Investors want to know where materials are
Mm.
sourced, how the goods are transported, if the business has really good risk mitigation strategies in
Mhm.
place, such as inventory buffers or dual sourcing. And companies that perform well in those areas are seen as lower risk from an investment perspective.
Got it. Got it. So I mean, as we mentioned, the headlines right now are tariffs and geopolitical. I'm just curious because it's hard to measure that. It's hard to know what's truly a risk, how many tiers up in the supply chain is that going to impact goods and all the rest of it. Do you have any perspective on that?
So here in the United States, Trump's America First policies is a geopolitical risk, and particularly when it comes to the trade war with China. And it's really prompting a reevaluation of global supply chain landscape. And companies are
Mm.
being forced now to reconsider the stability of their supply chains in the face of these potential restrictions and geopolitical issues. And so, in response, investors are becoming a lot more cautious. They're asking for a lot more detailed assessments of how companies are managing these risks
Hmm.
and seeing a shift. Like you said, we were looking at supply chains. The indicators were all lagging indicators.
Yeah.
It's too
Sure.
late by the time we saw them.
Yeah.
So now we're seeing a shift towards a lot more comprehensive and proactive approaches,
Hmm.
and companies are being asked to demonstrate if they have contingencies in place for both global and regional disruptions, and from tariffs to geopolitical conflicts to natural disasters. So it's really broadened the risks that companies with supply chains have to manage.
Wow. So companies are the investment community is increasingly wanting companies to have a replacement economy, backup suppliers, and which
Yeah.
which for anyone listening to the show that works in sourcing, finding alternative suppliers is like doing your homework twice. It is so hard. We don't sit in the seat of sourcing managers and all of the decisions. I mean, the switching cost for suppliers is incredibly high. And so, but essentially, you're saying the investment community is wanting to see that their at least companies are investing into understanding if they need to switch.
Yeah, yeah. And yes, absolutely. And you see now I was reading something in the paper today that was talking to uh, auto manufacturers who want to move their manufacturing here and their supply chains here, and it's going to take them years to do that.
Yeah, yeah,
And who knows what the world is going to look like. Every investor knows that tariffs result in inflation. I mean, prices go up. Well, the higher the tariffs for
sure,
the United States, the increase in prices. So that is something that Trump has made a promise in when he campaigned, that prices were going to come down. So the two don't really sit comfortably together. So something
understood.
has to give.
Well, you just said, I want to go back to something you said a little bit earlier. You said United States is a geopolitical risk. What from a trade standpoint? Can you say a little bit more of what you mean by that?
Right now, what's happening is very political.
Sure.
And so for example, I mean, look at what's happening in Ukraine. One day, Ukraine is a very close ally, and Russia is the enemy. Today, that's completely changed, like in a moment. Now, Russia
Mm.
is our friend, and Ukraine is our enemy. And that has huge implications. Look at now what's happening in Europe. They're scrambling,
Mm.
and because they have relied on the United States to support
Right.
them all these years, especially when it comes to defense. But when it comes to issues like supply chain management, um, you're looking at areas, places that were once friends that are really we're going to get into a war with them. And I don't mean like a physical war
Yeah.
necessarily, but
Trade
whether it's a
war. Yeah.
trade war or a cold war.
Mm.
And this is going to influence. where people want to source their supplies from, and it's going to have a huge impact on markets as we're seeing.
Yeah, it clearly, and you're, I mean, you're looking at, we're so U.S. focused when we talk about finance, but the reality is, defense companies in Europe just had a run. I mean, just a massive run for an increase in value because of geopolitical events. So
Exactly.
we're in an era where um, uh, there's actually wins to be found in this chaos. I mean, am I correct? Is that,
You know what? That is a big point. That is a really important point when it comes to also supply chain is companies have to, when they're talking to investors, position this as an opportunity.
yeah, yeah,
Um, we may not like what we're seeing, or we may like what we're seeing geopolitically. Um, Regardless of our political point of view, um, companies need to position and see this as an opportunity for them to have more transparency or to more ethically supply, to bring, suppliers in-house, to diversify suppliers. So,
yeah.
and I think that's really important that companies start to position this as an opportunity, not as a impending disaster.
Yeah, we always say, turn the headwinds into tailwinds, and how do you turn? I think I'd be interested to hear how you would advise management teams who are now needing to explain how they're managing their supply chains to investors. What guidance would you give management teams when it comes to opacity in their supply chain, switching costs, all the rest of it? What do investors want to hear from management teams?
So, if I'm a management team, I would start by framing all our vulnerabilities as opportunities for improvement and innovation. So, such as adopting sustainable practices, management can align investor priorities with long-term value creation. And I think that's really important. It's really crucial to outline the potential impact of these geopolitical risks and climate change. So, be really upfront about it. So, how do these risks impact supply chain? How have we developed a really clear roadmap for addressing these challenges? And I think by showing investors that companies are prepared for a wide range of disruptions and are really actively managing these risks, companies can build confidence and really foster stronger relationships with investors. They can also demonstrate how they're leveraging technology right now to improve
Hmm.
visibility and risk management,
Hmm.
explaining how their approach using technology to sustainability, to ethical sourcing, and then I mentioned it before, but showing that they have diversified supply chains and that they really built resilience into their operations. Um, and I think you'll see the word resilience replacing ESG in the future. It's not
Oh
politically
no.
charged.
Oh
Resilience is
gosh.
always a good thing.
I
Maybe
know.
use like the word authentic though. It might be like, wait, what does that mean? I hope you brought your resilient self to yoga class today.
Oh man, my true self, my whole self, my resilient self, my transparent self. We are just, the word salad that we put out. And that's my question here is like, management teams are going to be tempted to put word salads out to their investors that say everything and mean nothing.
Yeah.
What are the core things? What are the like tactics, the brass tacks that you're looking for to hear from them? Because you're going to be hearing a lot of noise from management teams about resilience, authenticity, sustainability, whatever it is. How do you cut through the cruff and know that they're doing something?
Yeah, I think so I would say there's probably like four phrases that have become meaningless but are really important, and companies need to show how they're doing it. So those phrases are transparency, data driven insights, compliance readiness, scenario planning, stakeholder engagement. These are words that we've used for a while. And
Mm,
so for transparency, if companies can really demonstrate that they have clearly outlined all of their identified risks, and they have a really clear mitigation strategy for all of that. That's being transparent. And
mm,
data-driven insights. If a company can explain how are they using technology to provide very quantifiable metrics on their supply chain resilience
Mm.
and really showing what are they doing, whether it's blockchain, whether it's using AI for predictive analysis, which is
Hmm.
also brings me to scenario planning.
Hmm.
So preparing responses for potential disruptions caused by geopolitical events or climate change and being able to show investors how you're doing that scenario planning. Are you using AI for that? AI is a perfect tool for
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Compliance readiness. So, demonstrating how you're adhering to regulations, mainly in the EU, but also there's the Uyghur Forced
Of
Labor
course.
Act here. And then the last one is stakeholder engagement. So, how are companies meaningfully collaborating with the suppliers, with local NGOs can be very helpful in this
Mm.
regard, and government to address systemic issues like forced labor or even
Mm.
climate risks like
Yeah.
deforestation. So, local, like really actively and meaningfully engaging with local NGOs that are focused in these areas
Right.
could be a really important strategy.
I mean, the typical supplier engagement over the last 20 years has been, I'm going to come around once a year, beat you up with a 400 question questionnaire. You're going to answer those. I'm going to put them in a report, and I'll see you next year. And that just doesn't seem to be the right recipe for the world that we're living in now, which requires a lot more like real collaboration, not air quotes collaboration, like buyers helping suppliers with their own supply chain. Is that something that you're looking for as well? Is that something that investors value when they say supplier engagement? That's a big term. What do they mean? Do they mean buyers helping suppliers or just talking to them or beating them up with questionnaires?
No, I think it's really engaging. And if you
Okay.
look at, Ben Skinner, who founded
Of course.
Transparentum, and I think that's a really good example of this. So he was a reporter. He would go out and name and shame manufacturing companies and others who had forced or child labor in their supply chains.
Right.
He'd write a big article about it. Maybe their stock would go down for a little while,
Mm.
but it comes back. People forget.
Yeah, of
And
course.
he'd walk away and nothing was changed. So he founded Transparentum to actually work with these companies to improve their supply chains and make sure that they didn't have these risks in them.
Mm.
And so I think you will see companies taking that same approach. You've got to do things like spot audits too.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean just sitting in a conference room and believing whatever the management of that company tells you. It means really getting out there and looking around and seeing and talking with employees.
Well, I know even for myself, running a business, we're still a small business, but obviously very, very busy and have a lot going on. And I can only focus on a few things any one day. And I have to believe that the plates that I'm running around and spinning are doing well. I can't run it. I can't see everything. I can't look at everything all the time. How what advice can you give to management teams to be able to understand what is enough when it comes to let's call it supply chain resilience? What advice can you give them to not just check the boxes when it comes to investment, but actually check the boxes to actually improve their business over time, given what you're seeing happening uh, in the supply chain space and whether it's geopolitical or human rights.
I mean, I think probably the most important thing is to basically it's enhancing supply chain management.
Mm.
Um, and so implementing a lot more robust management systems is going to be critical.
Yeah.
So really sophisticated tracking and tracing technologies
Mm.
to prove things like the country of origin and compliance with certain tariff rules. So I
Mm.
think you'll see a lot more new technology being used to do this. So I think that's a really great use of AI.
Yeah.
Um, and we're going to see a shift towards nearshoring or reshoring of production, mainly as a result of tariffs. So that's going to make managing these suppliers much easier. But I think we're going to see some new suppliers, a lot of new suppliers emerging as a result of the tariffs in particular.
We don't know each other really well. We've talked a couple times, but based on the times we have talked, and also just kind of what you focused on in your career, it seems like you have a close relationship with hope. Am I accurate there?
Absolutely. Yes,
So,
I do.
okay. So if that's the case, how's your hope doing these days?
There are, we all experience these moments of deep despair.
Sure.
um, I tend to be very optimistic. So no matter
Mm,
what is going on, the chaos around us, there's always going to be an opportunity.
yeah.
And so right now, I think we're all just trying to figure out what is that opportunity.
Mm,
And the thing about it is that the implications of what's happening now with tariffs, geopolitical issues, even climate change, these are going to have really lasting effects on all of us who are trying to do
mm,
business. And so, what we don't want to do is make a rash decision about our business right now because, this is what the president and his administration wants to see. Because who knows, in 4 years, it may be totally different.
mm,
So, I think we have to adapt in ways that get us through these they are pretty uncertain times. We don't know what's going to happen. One day we've got
mm,
tariffs, the next day they're delayed.
mm.
So I think we have to be really smart, and so my approach is I'm not going to do anything dramatic. If I have to change the name of a fund from ESG to something else, I'll do that. That's
You're
okay.
resilient,
As long as I know what this is all about.
right?
Um, and, we have to remember that there are still companies, a lot of companies and a lot of people out there who care deeply about these issues. And
Sure.
so we are not the only ones pushing sustainability in a time where that's become really politically unattractive.
Well, that's inspired, and it sounds authentic. You brought your authentic yoga self to this interview. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that to me.
Well, thank you for coming on, and I hope you'll come back on soon because we're going to continue to have lots more questions for you.
Thanks so much for having me, Justin.
This is the one thing, the part of the show where we take one thing from the interview and dig deeper. Phyllis talked about authenticity and even joked about yoga teachers who tell you to bring your authentic self. A few years ago, I was on my laptop late at night and I saw some video of this artist playing on the Stephen Colbert show. And his performance just, there was something like I'd never seen before. Sounds and tones and performance that felt authentic. It was a guy named Stephen Wilson Jr., and he had this amazing story, his backstory about his dad being a boxer and growing up in Indiana and going to Tennessee to write songs and try to make it in music. And here he was, he'd written this entire album and dedicated it to his dad and how much he missed his dad. It was a grown man talking about how much he missed his dad in public in song. How authentic was that? I was locked for a good hour. I was just going down the rabbit hole, learning about this artist and really just becoming a fan within minutes. I followed him since then, and he went on to build an amazing career for himself and has been at the Country Music Awards, and he's just off to the races. His shows, he doesn't have big marketing behind him. There's no big record label. There's nothing pushing it other than just the music and the artist and the story behind it. And fans go to his show and are just enraptured because they love seeing something authentic. Brené Brown, Queen of Authenticity, says that authenticity is the daily practice of letting go who we think we're supposed to be and embracing who we are. I believe we're at a turning point where virtue signaling in the marketplace is out and authenticity is in. The problem is some companies are going to be using this turning point as an opportunity to abandon social investments like the one Phyllis was talking about and the kind of investments that her team screens for. And companies that do this will do that at their own peril. In 2023, Boston Consulting Group conducted a study that found that the 100 most trusted companies in their trust index generated 2.5 times as much value as their peers and enjoyed 47% higher PE multiples. Authenticity is valuable. Corporate authenticity means that what the company says is aligned to what it does, and what the company does is aligned to who it is. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe.